I think about our sisters who aren't here, and that I have to like do this for them, and I have to create to like make it easier for us, and it's by us, you know?
Adam, Richie, Lia, I'm so excited to have you here with me today. This is such a special moment and I cannot wait to dive in. I want to introduce the three of you. The first, we have Richie Shazam, an incredible artist, model, photographer. Richie, you've worked with so many brands globally, from Coach, Rachel Comey, Ashish, and you're even filming your first TV project right now with Vice. I'm so excited to learn more about that, so congratulations. We also have Adam Eli, author of the new Queer Conscience. You've also teamed up with Gucci to edit their zine Chime. Big fan of that and big fan of everything you do. And also photographer Lia Clay Miller. She has had her work in W, New York Times, Interview, Wall Street Journal. Lia, you are also the first transgender photographer to photograph the cover of Out magazine. I am Andrew Gelwicks. I am a celebrity stylist and author of The Queer Advantage. Today, we're gonna be talking about queerness and the really powerful, interesting, and deep-rooted connection with creativity. And I'm really honored to have three leaders in this space who really have done such an incredible job of lifting up other queer voices within fashion and beauty and really just pushing the industry forward. One of my favorite things about working in this sphere is that there's so many queer people. And I feel so lucky to have so many colleagues and collaborators that do identify as queer. And I'm curious, each of you throughout your careers have collaborated with people both queer and not queer. Have you noticed a different synergy when you are collaborating with queer people rather than people who do not identify as queer?
Well, I think I only have collaborated with queer people mostly.
Really?
I mean, that's probably a lie. I think it's just like communication in general, like, and they just like get it in a way that like only queer people do. It's like you could be like that 1992 cover of Okotai by Stephen Meisel. They're like, yeah, that one definitely. And it kind of goes into this thing where you like don't even really have to conversate. You just both understand like where you're coming from and like what you want to get. Like sometimes it's like difficult outside the queer spectrum because I'm trying to explain something that's like centric to a queer idea or like a queer image that I've like seen in the past or something that's just like beyond, and like I don't know how to explain it in the terms that they understand, where I'm like, this is iconic, you need to understand this. So especially within like the trans community and like being able to work with like trans people, we both get each other, we both know why we're here.
I think especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that when you're photographing someone, that's such an intimate moment and you need to really have that trust. Do you find that to be really helpful when you're photographing someone who is queer and may have that sense of trust in the relationship you're having in that moment?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, because like, well, you're photographing kind of like what they want to look like, and you need to figure out what they want to look like and how they see themselves kind of. But at the same time, it's like, I really don't want to fuck this up. Like, I don't want to get this wrong. Like, there's more of a responsibility, I think. I feel like a lot of like people who aren't queer, who like go towards a queer community, it's like this tabloid experience of being like, oh, you're so different. Like, let's focus on the things that make you different. And I feel like when it comes from like a queer perspective, it's more like an egalitarian experience where it's like, okay, I'm photographing you as a queer person. I understand how queer people want to be perceived, and I want to do my best to try and get that right.
What about you, Adam? Throughout your experience, how have you noticed working with other queer people and that relationship?
I'm going to say yes and no. And the first part is yes, in that sometimes you walk into a room the same way that I have with Lia or Richie when I've been able to work with the two of them. And it's just like, I get it. We're on the same page. We have the same references. We understand what we're doing here. And we also understand what it's like to be queer in that space. The creative director of Chime Zine, MP Cinque, and we were introduced through Gucci, and we looked at each other within like 30 seconds. We were on the exact same page, and they introduced us, but we've been inseparable as friends and as creative partners ever since. And that's definitely because of our shared queerness. But also, I want to say that sometimes I've had experiences where it works the other way around, and that I find that particularly gay men can be really, really mean to each other and also to themselves. And so I'll also be in a space where there's a gay man who, like, maybe he's a little older than me or maybe a little younger than me, and they're like, somehow it feels like we're competing even though we're obviously all on the same team. I think it's both. Marginalized communities stick together and have a tendency to tear each other apart, which is why when you told me that it was going to be with Lia Clay Miller and Richie Shazam, I was like, yes, like 110% I'm in, because these are two people that I feel like really, really uplift the queer community just by being themselves and doing their work.
Thank you, baby.
Love you.
What about you, Richie? You do so much in so many different spaces. How does this resonate with you?
I think to really answer this question in full honesty, it's like us gathering today and all being open and having this dialogue is so imperative, because we're being given space and agency to discuss. And I think that that's part of the larger contextual conversation. It's just hearing our voices. And also, I know when I work with my family, other queer folk, it's like my duty and my job is to make them feel safe and make them feel comfortable and make them feel validated. And I'll do everything within my means to do so. If I'm being photographed or if I'm photographing someone, it's very important for me to just handle it with a lot of care and a lot of sensitivity. That's what's so beautiful about working with queer family in these spaces. And something that I've noticed is when the jobs become more corporate, not in consideration of brown, Black bodies, queer bodies, there still needs a lot of work. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to really ensure that everyone's being treated fairly and with respect. And that's why I feel even more pressure and more anxiety when I'm in those spaces, because I'm kind of setting a tone and setting a new frequency on how to treat us and how to look at us. And we're not just here as these commodifiable little catchphrases. How do you get us within these spaces in other roles, like not just being featured, but long-term contracts, long-term visibility, and also behind the scenes, in front, all of it. That's the real work. And
that really does lead into my next question. Throughout the years, and part of this is because of the work the three of you have done, is we've seen a more queer representation and gender representation in fashion and beauty. I personally am so excited about Aaron Phillip being the new face of Moschino. There's still a lot of room to grow and a lot of work to be done. While we have this momentum, I'm curious if you were going into the boardroom of one of these corporations and able to sit in at those meetings and where they're talking about concepts and talent and who to hire and which direction to go in, what would you tell them?
I've been in the room with people like this, and the problem most of the time is they're trying to hire you to do what they view they need you to do. Especially during Pride Month, where it's campaign after campaign after campaign, and it's they don't want your vision, they want their vision, they just want a queer tinge to it, so they could check off the thing and keep on going. And it's difficult. It's difficult to be okay, you need to trust me. You need to know that this is what I expect for myself, this is what I expect for the people on set, this is what I expect for the models, and this is the vision that we want to bring. And it's rarely that. It's most of the time it's just we want to feature this t-shirt and this is how we want to shoot it. Most of the time when they're approaching you and they give you references that they deem as queer references, they're not shot by queer people, where it's a more voyeuristic take on it. So it's this backwash of being okay, this is me trying to change something, and then being no, stay in your lane and keep doing what we have figured out is profitable. And a lot of it has to do with money, and that's the big issue. I think they're prioritizing money over people and people's ideas. They are trying to sell something, and it's always on the backs of us with the interpretation that it's for us, but it's not actually for us.
I definitely want to echo what Lia said. Two things. The first thing is hire trans people and hire gender nonconforming people. If your team does not have gender nonconforming people or trans people on it, it is incomplete. Hire Black people and if your team does not have any Black people in it, your team is incomplete. So that's one. And the second point that I always make is that it is literally astonishing to me that today, or almost every single major fashion brand, the majority, if not maybe 90% of the people on the runway are still, and I'm going to air quote, sample size, which I just think is so crazy because the runway is meant to be like the purest vision of creative director's mind. And your entire vision is people that are one size. That doesn't make any sense to me. The way I personally define queerness, which is just how I define it, everyone defines it differently, is that queerness means other or different, especially when it comes to gender or sexuality. And so fashion, when we're looking at other people, like plus size people or non-sample size people, are living in a world and have to buy fashion in a system that was not created for them. And in a way, that's a type of queerness, that's a type of otherness, and it's one that doesn't make any sense to me because the world just doesn't look like that. So why do runways look like that? And yes, there are bigger girls on the runway, and that is great, but every time that happens, there's this huge round of applause, which again is needed, but it shouldn't be like that because the fashion world is just othering people that don't have to be othered. Why are we creating a system in which someone is inherently different?
Right before we started this, I was watching clips of Rihanna's fashion show from last night, and I'm watching it and I'm just thinking, yes.
How? I mean, are other brands not doing this? I can't understand it.
What about you, Richie? How do you feel about this?
I think the conversations also, like, just in this moment, you know, how everything, all of the political stuff has really been, you know, front and center, and everyone's just trying, I feel like a lot of these brands too are trying to say the right thing, do the right thing. And it's like, there's a lot of trying to gain better comprehension on what they should do. And I've had so many people reach out, you know, asking my opinion, this, that, and the third, but it's sort of to fill, you know, that they're doing the right thing right now. And I think that the best thing for people to do is to clean house, you know, to really, you know, look within and start with their employment practices. And, you know, it's like the whole argument of just posting the black square kind of thing. It's like, no, there's so much more that needs to be done. This is about us, you know, demanding that we be in these places. And like, I'm just so tired of doing the extra labor when I should also be included in a lot of these conversations. Like, yeah, I've been in creative conversations with people that I once was never included in that. And that was a new sensation. And that even in itself was kind of gut wrenching. It was a bit weird. I was like, oh my God, like you actually want to hear what I have to say? That's like a new normal too, you know, because we're historically not seen as a part of, and then all of a sudden it's been like a 180. I exude professionalism and I know that I bring a lot of fantasy and I bring a lot of really incredible ideas that these brands will obviously benefit from. And yeah, shout out to Rihanna, like the Savage Fenty show. It literally gave me goosebumps, and to see my peers just shining and looking so incredible just made me feel so great.
We live in such a visual world. A lot of companies like policy around queer people is like front facing and it's about the image in front and it's kind of like the image they're putting out. But like a big problem in the industry is they're not doing it internally. Like behind the scenes, it's still the same people running things. They're just trying to like cover their spots. You need to have like us in sustainable jobs that like are paying our bills, that are putting us in the same kind of economical places that you are. Like that's the only way to go forward.
So, I mean, the three of you have been in these rooms then. You've had these conversations. What feedback are you getting?
A lot of nodding.
Yeah. I've kind of gotten to the point where it's like, I won't do something that's like, has like a LGBTQ connotation on it unless it has like some sort of like backplay to it. Like unless you're giving money to like an organization that needs it, or unless you're doing something that actually benefits us, then I'm not going to do it. But at the same time, it's like, if you're not able to have these conversations for the actual queer people, then you shouldn't be doing it in the first place because you're going to get it wrong. And it's like hard a lot of times because you're like pulling at strings, like you're pulling at like the tiniest amount that you can. And you're like, okay, this is what I have. I'm going to try and make this work. It's never like, here's everything you need. Let me make sure that you are understood and we get it right. I've been in a lot of situations where it's like I have to I'll like send it to like my girlfriends who'd be like, I'm about to send this email. They're probably gonna fire me. Like, you know, but like you have to make those sacrifices too, because like until you do that, like they don't get it. But a lot of queer people aren't, because it's about survivalism. And a lot of like businesses that like hire queer people in this industry are pushing us to like exist in survivalism, where it's like we do this job because like we gotta pay our rent, you know? Like it's not like we're doing this job because we feel seen and like uplifted.
That fantasy is being like kind of taken away from us, you know. Like I think that I work to sustain and to survive, you know. That's the reality. And so much of it is like with these tight budgets and these weird parameters of working, it's like they take away, like they take our imagination, they strip away the fantasy, and then we're supposed to like make a whole shebang out of nothing. Do you know that people that look and exist like me, that are me, like we're struggling to survive and to exist in this world? And by you sort of, you know, giving me the bare minimum, that makes me lose all hope and all desire to want to do this in the first place. It is very trying to like constantly have to do this labor and educating people and letting them know, you know, because the reality is that a lot of these people, they have no idea, they don't get it.
One of the other leaders I interviewed for the Queer Advantage was Drew Elliott, the global creative director of MAC Cosmetics. And he brought up this very interesting concept of talking about subculture to mass culture. And he was saying that a lot of queer people develop so much of what's brought into the mass culture. And I'm wondering how the three of you have seen that throughout your own work and whether you've experienced that firsthand.
I mean, every celebrity in the game right now could be traced back to like a Black trans woman who was doing it 20 years ago. Like, period. That's it. I mean, like the aesthetic of the girls, the way they look, it's like Black trans women did that.
And so when you're talking subculture to mass culture, I think it's sort of watching your culture become mass culture. And I think that's a lot. It's
one of those things where, you know, are the dollars going into our communities? Are they going to uplift us? During the beginning of COVID, I did a print drive and I was selling a bunch of my prints, and I just saw it as my own plight and who I was, like being taken away from me and needing to raise awareness. And I'd gotten so much support from people, and it was just so interesting because as a result of doing this, so many entities started like, you know, doing print drives and raising money and raising awareness. And it was so great. But it was one of those things where as artists, we need to like look within ourselves to find solutions and find ways to like help our communities. And it was just this idea that so many people around me that aren't in my community, that they too can be doing these things, and like, but they choose not to, and constantly feeling like we have this burden and have to do all this labor all the time, and then they still want to like take from us.
How do you think we can go about changing this though, and, you know, giving awareness to this point?
What Lia said before was so beautiful about like, don't hire a queer person to exact your vision and then be like, it was by a queer photographer. Like, hire a queer person for their vision and their unique perspective on the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Creative
it.
director, darling.
Period. Make us the creative directors.
That's everything.
So another point that I would love to get your thoughts on is that a common skill and gift that I see through a lot of queer people that I know is this amazing ability of introspection, that queer people really just have such a beautiful understanding of themselves. And I think a lot of that, and, you know, I think through my own personal experience, at least, that came through, you know, complicated questioning and conversations I had with myself at such a young age, where I'm trying to figure out, you know, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking that? How is this making me feel? And as an adult now, I find that skill, I think, of introspection has really benefited me in my creative outlets. I'm wondering whether that resonates with the three of you.
Yeah, I mean, completely. I mean, I think growing up as like a trans woman specifically, it's like I had to gain so much momentum in myself and my own understanding just to like walk out the door like as my idea of what a woman was. Like before I walked out the door dressed as a woman, I needed to know who that woman was, what was she
Mhm.
gonna do, what was she gonna look like. And I think when you come from like that sort of setting, especially when you're going to like a society that's gonna like look down on you or like traumatize you and like kind of let you down, you need to have like such a strong like impact behind you to like understand like who you are just so you could fall back on that.
As now that you are an accomplished photographer, how have you seen that affect your work and your what you do now as a full-time photographer?
I mean, it changed the view. I mean, I can speak back to like my college days when I wasn't out and I was still like living as like a cisgender man. Like the women I was photographing were like kind of like repressed ideas of like who I was going to be, you know? And it's like one of those things where it's just like I was like living my fantasy through like the images kind of thing. And now I feel like my work is a lot more representational of like the women I'm photographing. Where it's like I kind of had to do this 180 where it's like, okay, I'm photographing these women as me. I need to step back from that, become this person, and then like look at other people, you know? And I think that's been kind of like my greatest like learning lesson as a photographer is learning how to photograph people like as themselves, not something that I'm trying to understand myself. I mean, there will always be parts of me in the photographs I take. It's just how photographers work. But at the same time, I feel like it needs to be more about representation than idealization.
How about you, Richie?
Definitely growing up, I didn't have a lot of examples of queer people that I saw myself in, or like just people in general. So now I'm like really understanding my evolution and where I am. I'm really excited for the future and like just being able to give a lot of hope, like intergenerationally, like just like showing people older and younger that, you know, just really taking pride in like our existences and not waiting for the change to happen, like actively taking action. One of my like favorite words to break is no. I've had a lot of people say no to me. And that was a word that really went deep into my soul and like broke me time and time again. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to find an alternative way. And I'm going to do so in a way where you won't even know that I'm coming. You know, it's just going to happen and it's going to bulldoze you. But that's what queer subversion, transgression like looks like. You know, we're constantly cutting edge and like outwardly like looking into the future. That's what we do. You know, we're setting the tone and really just embracing radical vulnerability, really seeing like being super vulnerable in these spaces and like being comfortable in telling my story. It's not easy, especially when brands are trying to like commoditize off of like who like you are. And like, you know, it's not like, oh, we're just like serving face and body and like, you know, obviously our bodies are being politicized and stuff, but it's like, I'm also telling you my story time and time again, you know, and it's as queer people, we're constantly evolving. It's not like I'm going from one end of the spectrum to the other. It's like I'm figuring out who I am actively, like the Richie I was 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It's constantly changing day in, day out. And as a creative, it's like I'm trying to have my work reflect that and trying to like make sense of all of it. So yeah, it's a lot.
My next question, actually, Richie, I want to a quote of yours I want to ask you about. You said, fashion and art are vehicles that give me agency to exist and show others that they can excel. I want to give other people the opportunity to speak and be heard. And I wonder if you can elaborate on that and the concept of creativity and fashion and art acting as the inspiration for success and excelling.
We're in such a groundbreaking time where I think digitally, like through the internet, so much like information is available and accessible. Like literally Gen Zers are mood boarding their identity based off of like what they see. And like that's something that we didn't have the opportunity to do. So talking about being visible, being heard, being seen, like growing up. And, you know, I was very fortunate to grow up in New York, but there were still a lot of hurdles. You know, I had to like hop on the E train and go from Queens to the city to go find my folk. But a lot of people don't have that luxury. And I think that within the circles of fashion and art, we're demanding space. We're demanding like, look at me, like, this is who I am. For me, I'm actively trying to serve fantasy. If it wasn't for my creativity and my ability to express myself through art and like creating things, I don't know if I would be existing and living in the way that I would want to, you know? And I want to show intergenerationally, I want to show people from all walks of life that they too can do this. We're having these conversations so we can make it easier for those other young people coming up. We want to like give them a little hope and positivity, and that we're doing the work for them, you know? It's a collective work that we're all doing.
I'm just so grateful to people like Richie and to people like Lia who put themselves and their work out there in a way that is so unapologetic and that does bring me joy and that does reflect the experience of queerness. I remember Teen Vogue ran an article that just said, Richie Shazam is having the best fashion week ever. And it just made my whole month. I think that I just want to take that moment to appreciate and especially appreciate the trans and gender nonconforming people that are out there really doing it for all of us as they always have been.
I've had a lot of downtime to really just think about my life and think about my work and just thinking like, damn, like I've come so far when my life expectancy was supposed to be cut short a long time ago. You know, it's exactly. Like mirroring those two things. Like I've been so fortunate and so blessed, but it's come at so much because I think about our sisters who aren't here and that I have to like do this for them and I have to create to like make it easier for us and it's by us, you know? So it's like us really owning our powers and trying to find the mysticism in all of it.
And honey, I'm just a photographer, darling. You're doing it all. I'm so impressed. Like,
I mean, there's literally no better way to end this than that. Really, I'm so honored that the three of you took the time to chat with me today. I mean, individually, all three of you inspire me so much. And I think the work that all of you do inspire so many people as well. So I think this conversation was so meaningful to me personally. So I thank you. And I will talk to you all very soon.
Thank you so much, babe. Thanks for having us.
So much.